It's a little bit agricultural time and our road trip to Tasmania continues. We're here in the apple aisle looking at some of the rather odd things this state produces. Last time it was dope, acres and acres of dope. This time, as I drive around in the air-conditioned comfort of my ute, Oscar continues to soak in the elements and excitement that is adventure bike riding.
It is embarrassing turning up with Oscar everywhere because not only does he ask all those scientific questions that no one cares about, he turns up on his crap motorbikes. What do you think about this one?
Oh, is that from the prehistoric ages?
What is that one? It's steaming. Is it on fire?
Oh,
no, what is that? Do you ride, Tom?
Well, I wouldn't be seen dead riding that.
No. It's quite a heavy bike too.
Looks like it.
Yeah, you don't want to drop. So this is an adventure bike apparently. So if you're, you can ride across the desert and whatnot.
Yeah, okay.
But hard to pick up if you drop. Yeah.
It's fine. That wasn't supposed to happen.
No, it always does that, doesn't it?
Only when you're around.
Yeah.
I get nervous around you.
Yeah. I'm going.
Give me flushes.
Now we probably should explain where we are. This is Bushy Park Estates, found in the Derwent Valley, a bit more than an hour's drive from Hobart. Not only is it beautiful, it grows some very important ingredients that most of us really, really like.
When I was a kid, Oscar, driving around Tasmania, I think it was with my dad, we drove past these fields which just had these poles in them, nothing else, just a bunch of poles. And I said, what is that? And Dad said, it's a telegraph pole farm, son. You know, the wooden telegraphs? And for a long time, I thought that's where telegraph poles came from. They just popped up nice and tall and straight from a field. But it turns out I was wrong. They are indeed poles, but they're holding these wires, Oscar, which in turn hold ropes.
Which grow hops, Hardy.
Hops, Oscar.
Yeah. Have you ever been in a hop farm? Look, it's not something everyone knows about, is it? It's you don't really think about where hops and how hops are grown, and they're not an industry that are all around Australia. There's a big hop industry here in Tasmania.
The question is, what do we use hops for? You don't go to the supermarket and buy a kilo of hops, for example. You're not adding them to your spaghetti bolognese. What is it indeed that we use hops for, and why is there an industry?
Well, Hardy, you're leading the witness there. I think you know exactly what they're for.
Beer, Oscar.
They are the essential ingredient in beer.
I love this story already.
Tasmania has a long history of growing hops. They were first introduced in 1803, so they're not endemic. They're they're an imported product into Tasmania. But we didn't really establish a growing industry here until about 1827. Ebenezer Shoebridge, which is just a fabulous name, came out here in 1865, and they had to rely on the geography and the landscape, the soils and the water abundance out here, because this farm lies in the confluence of the Styx and the Derwent rivers out here in the valley. And Ebenezer thought that's just the right place for hops. They're quite thirsty plants and a nice stable climate in the foothills of the mountains. And so that was 1865. And by 1867, he's got his first crop.
And Owen, throughout the valley, there are sort of signs of the old days, aren't they, of the hop industry of days gone by, some subtle, some not so subtle. Tell us about this big kiln.
Yeah, up and down the valley, you'll see old drying houses, oast houses all around. Most of them really run down.
Yeah.
This one we look after because we think this one's really historically significant. This is Ebenezer Shoebridge's 1867 kiln. We call it the text kiln because there's some biblical inscriptions and very inspirational stuff inscribed on the building.
It is, it's a masterpiece. Why kiln? Why do we need to kiln?
When hops come off the field, they're around about 80% moisture. So just like your vegetables in your fridge at home, they'll degrade over time. So we have to dry the hops down to make them stable. And once they're stable, we can access overseas markets.
Is this kind of the birthplace of Australian beer? Is that what we're saying or not?
We certainly like to think so.
Yeah.
If you're Australian and you love beer, chances are you'll have had a beer with hops from this farm.
And I think that it helps that it's just a beautiful place.
It's not tough to come to work, that's for sure.
Everywhere you look, there's poles, wires, and hops. Growing like weeds, hops are in fact a plant in the cannabis family. So here is a nice connection to our previous 2 episodes. The plant is a climbing perennial plant that are either male or female. The female plant produces the hop, which is the flowering cone used to flavour beer. Typically, it was used to preserve and stabilise beer, but it also impacts the chief bitterness that beer is known for. And the owners of Bushy Park Estates, Hop Products Australia, have growing them down to a fine art.
It just so happens that a good old mate of mine is farm manager of this gorgeous property.
What I really like about my job is I get such a broad scale view of the farm and the business. So part of my job is I need to oversee what's happening in the breeding garden. I then have to look after all the operations, the hiring of staff, all that sort of stuff, and then I get to show brewers across the farm, and I'm actually involved in every step of the process.
Tom and I went to school together and also ended up working together on a farm. And now he knows about as much as anyone about how to grow hops. So I asked him about the growth cycle as well as about their pest management and what his main challenges are as the farm manager.
Around September, the plants will break dormancy. The initial shoots will come through when the soil warms up, typically during the month of September. Then the initial shoots are typically pretty woody and rank and not particularly productive. So we go through and we burn them off. In November, on a pretty strict time schedule, we have to twist the binds around the coir string. It typically takes sort of about 4 weeks to get across the farm. Once we finish training, they're typically about 800 mil high, and then they'll put on nearly 5.5 metres of growth on top of that in about the following 6 weeks after training. After Christmas, they'll turn from a vegetative growth stage into a reproductive growth stage where they'll start to flower. From January on, they'll start to develop hop cones, which is what we're here for. We come through and harvest them in March. And then as winter starts to set in, back in sort of June, the plants will go back into dormancy, so they'll go to sleep for a couple of months and we'll start the cycle again.
So not many people actually see hops growing, like everyone drinks beer, but no one sees, like they're pretty amazing. We've got a couple of different varieties here, you said, and different stages of development. Can you tell me a bit about the flowering process and what we've got over here versus another variety here?
Yeah, so this plant here, obviously it's undergone its vegetative growth, so it's reached the wire. Now it's turned into more of like a reproductive stage. So here you can see these are all very juvenile flowers. Yeah. So they just look like mini burrs at the moment, and they'll continue to grow and develop over the course of January and February. Whereas the plant over here, this is a little bit more advanced. So these have got some juvenile hop cones at the moment, and they'll continue to grow to probably be about this big once they're matured.
Oh, really?
So they've still got a bit of growing to go, but they're a little bit more advanced. We're quite lucky here in Australia there's no real fungal pathogens that are an issue for us here in the hops. We have trouble with two-spotted mite, which is the main pest that we need to control for. So we try and use an integrated pest management program to try and stay on top of the mites. Recently, in the last couple of years, supply, one particularly of materials and labour, has been quite difficult coming off the back of COVID and all the other things happening in Europe, security of fertiliser, and also trying to get the string ordered on time as well. That comes from Sri Lanka, so there's many other hurdles that we have to jump through.
Tom's comment about supplies and fertiliser tempts me no end to launch into a discussion about food security and farming, but that'll just have to wait for future episodes of ALBA. Back to hops. After a season growing,
When March comes around, it's all hands on deck, both in the field and in the processing shed for the harvest.
So harvest typically starts during the first week of March. At the moment we have probably 5,000 sheep scattered across the farm, which are trimming the bottom of the plants, cleaning up all the leaves and the growth. The first pass of harvest is what we call a bottom cutter, which is like a hedge trimmer on the front of a tractor where it cuts the plants off at the bottom of the ground. Then they're left hanging from the wire at the top. A tractor and trailer come along, which is pushed by what we call the top cutter. So that's a front end loader with a hedge trimmer on the front. They'll push the tractor and trailer along, cutting the string off at the top of the wire where they'll fall into the trailer. The trailer and tractor will then carry the hops back to the picking plant where they're stripped off the vine with a mechanical picker. They're then dried, can take sort of 8 to 12 hours depending on each variety to go through the kiln. Once they've been kilned, they're left in a conditioning room for 12 hours where they cool down and just equilibrate with the environment. Once they've conditioned, we put them into a bale press. So we press them into a 75 kilo bale. We need to monitor the temperature of those bales for a couple of days, and then they're sent off to cool store and get turned into pellets. The coir string that we use is biodegradable, made out of coconut husk. That's part of the picking process, so the hops get stripped off the bines. Then everything that's not a hop cone, so the stems, the leaves, the string, everything goes through a mulcher. We then take that mulch and we windrow it on the farm and we compost it for a number of years. And once it's fully composted, we spread it back out in the paddocks as mulch.
Now, Oscar might have a mate, but I have a much closer family connection to Bushy Park Estate. My wife Bella's dad actually used to manage the farm for about 10 years back in the 90s. It's a very Tasmanian story, and while we're talking of incestuous things, that's exactly what goes on in the breeding program here.
And we're here in front of a bag, which isn't very picturesque, it's not particularly romantic, but what it represents for us is this start of this breeding cycle program. We isolate the female flower, so before it's generated a hop cone, and it's very much traditional plant breeding. We also go and find a male. So we know
this is a male.
Let's say we've got a male here.
This is a female.
We bag up the female flower.
Yeah.
We go and collect pollen off the male.
Yeah.
So we choose these. Important thing here. We know this male. We know what attributes we're looking for. We know this female. We're going to roll the dice and try and mix those attributes together and we'll see what we get.
Right.
So we get the pollen. At the right point in the year, we open the bag here and we blow the magic dust straight on the flowers, seal it back up. Yeah. Okay. And then basically, we put male pollen on a female flower, right? It's not that hard.
No.
Then we wait, cone development, seed formation. We literally physically pick out the seeds out of the cone and plant them. Seedlings grow up. Sex phenotyping, heaps of culling. And then we plant out and see what we get.
That's like Tinder for hops in here.
It's busy in here.
Swipe right, swipe right.
You might think that growing hops as one of the main ingredients for beer is fail-safe. Loved worldwide, you couldn't go wrong. But as hops became a commodity, the company came under huge pressure to do something different.
People will be very familiar with the role of hops in beer, bringing that base bitterness. And for many, many decades, hops were just that bittering agent in beer, giving it that lovely bitterness that we all know and love in lager. So unfortunately, that component of hops effectively translates to a commodity. You can bring that bitterness from any hop grown anywhere. And so here in Tasmania, we were exposed to this global commodity pricing for this bittering potential in hops. And so the industry goes through really deep cycles of boom and bust. While we are exposed to the commodity cycle of the base bittering potential of hops, we also knew that we needed to diversify away from that if we were to avoid the next bust in the cycle. So the hop breeding program that has been here for many decades has always been interested in making new varieties to increase that bittering potential. But through the 90s, the beer landscape changed and people started drinking beers with more hop flavour and aroma, not just bitterness. We tried to harness that and make classic plant breeding decisions which would lead to more flavoursome hops. And we've been very successful. We currently have quite a rare breeding program in the world. There'd probably only be 3 or 4 other programs as successful as ours. And we've managed to diversify our entire range of varieties into modern, flavour-forward hops orientated on aroma. So our modern range of varieties has found homes in breweries locally, right from Tasmanian and Australian breweries of all sizes, and also enjoys excellent support overseas. And we actually export something like 65% of our output to international markets. Probably our most famous new variety coming out of our own in-house breeding program is Galaxy. This hop really changed the outlook of this business. And we talk about innovation in our business and trying to fit the needs of customers to do what they need to do, our brewing customers to deliver the beers they need to do. And Galaxy really was the first successful modern variety that allowed us to really significantly step forward the diversity we're offering. It is globally recognised, it is really popular for beer drinkers, and of course that means it's pretty popular for brewers as well.
Who'd have thought that bearded hipsters in knitted cardigans would come to the rescue of the Tasmanian hop industry? That's exactly what's happened, and now these Galaxy hops, bred and grown right here, are famous in breweries around the world. But it's clear that what this business is really about is breeding new varieties of hops, and from there it all gets a bit sciencey and complex.
Hops are quite unique and a very tricky breeding proposition.
For some unknown reason that I can't think of, this made Oscar very excited.
Yes, well, that's right. Because in one way, this can be called a traditional breeding program, but in another way, it's not traditional at all. Because generally, when breeding cropping plants, breeders are looking primarily for yield, pest and disease resistance, and vigour, what we might call agronomic traits.
The first phase is very focused on agronomics. We must understand if it grows reliably, if it's a good, big, strong plant, how many flowering sites, like we call these lateral arms, how long are the laterals, how do the flowering sites look, what's the internode space, all this plant architecture.
Yeah.
We need to establish that.
Yeah.
And it's, seriously, the fail rate, kill, that one's okay.
Yeah.
We screen out a lot just in the first, say, 1 to 3 years in the ground, but simply based on agronomics.
Okay, so the agronomics is the first culling process, I guess. The
and then
first
we need some runway to establish reliability.
Yeah.
It has to grow in different seasons.
Yeah.
A wet one, a hot one, a cold one, a cloudy one that's otherwise okay.
Yeah.
How does this thing perform in the environment?
But here, ultimately, what they want is not just a high-yielding plant, but their end goal is a hop plant with flavour complexity and difference in the hop market. But without good agronomic characteristics, the plants won't perform as well.
Not all hops smell and taste good, right? Lots taste terrible, right? And we can tell those quite early on.
Yeah, okay.
By the time we get a sample out to a commercial brewer for feedback, we've put 8 years into this hop.
Yeah.
We are quite confident we can grow it to the right specs. We understand how it fits in the brewer's world, and then we're really looking for them to explore it and confirm whether that flavour profile is nice and they can find a home for it in a beer.
Yeah.
So it's a really long process. We might go from 3,000 cultivars in the ground in year 0 to literally 2 out of that breeding year out to brewers.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
So it becomes a really complex program because they need to breed, both for agronomics and for that elusive point of difference. This is challenging and has led to some great innovation, which we will hear about in a minute. But first, let's wind back a bit and watch Hardy try and understand what Owen's talking about.
You might have a spindly looking little male, but it's really high cone flowering sites, lots and lots of flowering sites. Right, we want that, that's right.
Yeah.
Got a really robust female that doesn't have the flowering sites we need. Let's put A and B together and maybe we'll get that ideal mix of really robust plant with heaps of flowering sites.
The science was interesting, but all this talk about breeding and hops was really getting my juices flowing, and surely it was nearly beer o'clock.
Oh, and Andrew's disappeared to go look at fish or drink a beer or something, and it's my opportunity to talk a little bit about science because he gets a bit bored when I stand around and talk science. So, look, plant breeding, not just for this business, but I'm interested in plant breeding across the board. It's pivotal in agriculture. You were saying to Andrew before, you can detect the sex phenotypes of the plants. Can you tell me a bit about that? I'm pretty
Yeah,
interested.
absolutely. So we grow the seedling, and maybe when it's got 1 or 2 internodes, it's still quite a small plant.
Yeah.
We can take a near-infrared light and shine it onto the leaf, and we've generated a database of analytical points, if you like, that once we shine that light through the leaf, it can reference the database and determine whether it's going to be male or female.
It's worth repeating this. These guys can now tell the difference between male and female seedlings using an infrared signature of the plants. This means that they can remove the male plants immediately and don't have to wait until the plants grow a full cycle to show their flowers, which is the traditional way of determining the sex of the plants.
If our program is going to throw, let's say here at this Tasmanian site, because we're lucky enough to have a second site in Victoria, so we've got replicated breeding sites, which is quite rare in a breeding program. This site could throw, say, 3,000 seedlings into grow tubes. If we had to then go and deploy all 3,000 of those here into the jungle, it takes up a lot of space and a lot of maintenance and a lot of water and fertiliser. So if we can immediately cut that back to 1,500 and we either save resources on the ground, or we actually go and set our program up to deliver 6,000, and we do deploy 3,000 females only for this purpose. Do you know what I mean? So so by being able to
so
screen
it's a
out,
huge advantage to your
we can
business.
double throughput through the program just by identifying males versus females.
Yeah.
Really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
This is an awesome development which gives the business big cost savings, but also allows the breeding program to develop so much more quickly, as Owen said. This is the kind of stuff I really like seeing and get excited about. Not quite sure it's sunk in with Hardy though.
I was actually just blown away by how beautiful this farm is. It had nothing to do with not being interested.
Well, that's right. It's a beautiful farm and I was keen to ride around it for a while, admiring the crops, the river, the valley, and of course the delightful platypus.
Here's to that. Now, next time on A Little Bit Agricultural, it's a cherry on top.
So in 1995 we planted 400 cherry trees and planted a few cherry trees every year since. We export cherries to about 20 different countries during January and February. At the minute we're processing about 12 tonnes an hour, which is about 300 cherries a second or a little bit more.
That's next time on A Little Bit Agricultural. And remember, if you're enjoying it, please like and subscribe.